I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Well, Lisa, thank you for being a part of this podcast. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Here are some things I know, though. And you're a co-author of one of my all-time favorite books, which is Student Voice. And your life was transformed in a train station in England, is what I understand. So maybe you could say a little bit more about who you are, the work you do, just so people who don't know you will be familiar with you.
You have an excellent memory. Yes, I have the great privilege of working with Dr. Russ Quaglia and a fantastic team at the Quaglia Institute for School Voice and Aspirations. And Jim is right. I met Dr. Russ on a train platform in England where we were working on a different project. And we connected first over a love for fishing. And then very quickly after that, a love for education and really thinking about the things that we can do in schools to support students in amplifying their own voice and in helping adults to understand the types of things we can do to really create structures, policies, practices that facilitate that happening in a meaningful way in schools.
Well, I love, as I've said, and as we've talked about before, I love the Student Voice book. So I can't help but ask a little bit about, and it's really broader than Student Voice because you have a book on, or at least the Quaglia Institute has a book on teacher voice, principal voice. Is there one on parent voice?
There is, yeah. All sorts of voice books.
Right. So I want to talk about that, but so maybe I'll just say ask you a little bit about voice, in particular student voice. And then I'd like to talk about your new work on aspirations. And that's what you're going to be talking about at TLC. So I want to talk about that too. But how did you get involved in this whole idea of student voice? How did it come to be a big thing for you and for the Quaglia Institute?
Well, the Quaglia Institute, Dr. Russ Quaglia has been doing work in this space for, I think, about 40 years now. And his story is that he was from Maine and originally came from a space where there was so much conversation about kids just not caring or not having aspirations and dreams for their future, not using their voice to make a difference in the community, and kind of just feeling like that wasn't true, and really getting after how do we create spaces in school where students are more involved, where they are more of a partner in their learning, where their voices do matter, where we're listening to them, and where they have opportunities to both dream about the future and take action in the present to reach those dreams. So that's, I think, where Russ's work kind of originally started to evolve from. For me, again, I came across Russ when we were both working on a different project with Michael Fulling quite a number of years ago. And the more I got to know about their work, I had this feeling of, this is the team I'm supposed to be on. They just don't know it yet. And we never even had that conversation. And then one day Russ said, I think you're supposed to be on this team. And I said, I think the same. And the reason, Jen, is because there is such a heart match for me between the things that both Russ as a human and this institute as an organization, what they're about and their core values was just such a heart match to where I had come from as a classroom instructor and an educational leader. And so it was an easy leap to make into this partnership.
Well, the risk of taking us down the wrong path or taking us off track too much. What was the connection with Michael Fulling?
We were both working on the new pedagogies for global project that he was doing. And it's a project where they have a number of countries that are really looking at how do we do things and being able to learn from each other. And deep pedagogies for new learning is the accurate description for that. And so I was helping to lead the U.S. contingency, and then Russ was on that project as an advisor.
So Michael was crucial in my development as a educator. I worked with Michael at the University of Toronto and took a course with him, then did independent study. And then he's kind of been my mentor in many ways. I've always said, and I forget who it was that said this, but some famous jazz person said, how important was Louis Armstrong in your life? And that person said, know him, know me. And that's kind of how I feel about Michael. I mean, the whole emphasis on partnership, a dialogue, so much stuff that's central to us. He had me read Peter Senge's Fifth Discipline when it first came out. He was writing the book Change Forces at that time. So I never knew that connection existed between but you and
Yeah.
me and Russ. So that's
Yeah,
very
and I would say the same. I mean, I learned, so much from Michael about so many things, including got to spend a week at his lake home with him and learned how to cook on the green egg, which I had never learned was even a thing before. So learned all sorts of fantastic things from Michael over time.
very cool. So tell me a bit about the why the emphasis on student voice, and if you want to expand it out to teacher voice and
Of course.
principal voice, that'd be great, and parent
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah. So one of the things that we think is a crucial starting point is just defining what we even mean by voice. So we have a common definition that we use in our work, whether the entry point is student voice, teacher voice, parent voice, community voice, administrator voice, as you've said. This same definition holds true to any of those groups of stakeholders. And it's a three-part voice definition that's pretty simple, because one of the things we believe is that sometimes in education we make things too complicated simply because we can. And if we really want students to be critical partners with us, we need to be talking about things in terms that everybody can get on board with and have common language. So for us, we describe voice as first, being able to share your thoughts and ideas in an environment that is underpinned by trust and respect. And I think that one makes the most sense. Of course, voice is about talking and sharing things. And for that to happen, you have to feel safe and like there's at least some measure of mutual trust and respect. And I think that's often where thinking about voice stops. It's like, oh, yep, you're telling me things. And for a lot of students, that translates into, I'm going to tell you what I want you to do for me. Here are the things I don't like. Here are my problems, and so on. So the next two pieces of our definition are really important. The second is coming to the table to offer realistic suggestions for the good of the whole. So it's that whole teaching thing about don't just come with a complaint, also come with some ideas, some realistic suggestions. And of course, students need a lot of teaching around what's realistic, because coming to school one day a week and having McDonald's for the school cafeteria is not really realistic. And then the part of the whole definition that I'm probably the most passionate about is that good of the whole piece, because I don't think that's a natural way of being in our culture and society right now. You think even about just the algorithms that are bringing us more and more of what we like all the time. I go through phases where I have to ban myself from Amazon because every time I get on, they're like, hey, Lisa, we think you'd like to buy this. And I'm like, yes, I would. How did you know? I know, because they can see what I've shopped for previously and so on. And it's the same with music and news. We just keep it's this narrowing of being brought more of what we like. Now, there's some awesome things about that. I'm not anti-tech, but I think we also have to really intentionally teach students, when that is their life, everything coming to them, to also look outward. So to intentionally seek out other perspectives, to not just think of solutions that are good for me, but for the good of the whole. And then very quickly, the last of the definition, the third part, is taking responsibility, not only for what we say, but also what needs to be done. So for us, voice is not this passive thing where we just sit back and yap, yap, yap. It is very active. The whole lean in, step up. What action are you going to take based on the things that you believe in?
And I think both you and Russ would say that kids talking isn't necessarily voice. He said there's a lot of noise that's not voice. Kids just whining is not voice. Voice is something that's a genuine contribution, I suppose. How would you distinguish between noise and voice, if that makes sense?
It does, absolutely. So we actually have a whole series of lessons that we teach, funny enough, both to adults and to students, about the difference between noise and voice, and really teaching what is it that can make your voice powerful. So we go through this whole process of looking at not just what voice is, but what it is not. As you said, it is not whining. It is not complaining. It is not always getting your own way. And we often want to translate it as that. Well, you didn't hear me because you didn't do what I said. No, that's just called being spoiled. You can be heard and not get your own way, but there has to be a discussion about that. And so within that, for example, one of the pieces is how important body language is as well, tone and all of those things. We tell students, don't make me not hear what you're saying because of the way you're saying it. The way you say something is just as important as the actual words. And Jim, I would throw the compliment right back at you because, of course, we are a big fan of everything you've written, but in particular, my personal favorite of your works is Better Conversations. and just really the depth of research and strategy that you go into in that book about thinking, how do I engage in better dialogue? And my favorite tenet is the one about, are the conversations I'm a part of life-giving, or am I being an energy vampire? And students really get that. That's been something that we've used out of your work that really resonates. But you're right, there are a whole lot of nuances to teach students. It's not just providing the opportunity for you to talk in a focus group. That's great. That's allowing you to have a space to be heard. But we also have to teach you the ins and outs of how to use your voice in a powerful way.
And this just isn't just an opinion. You've done a lot of research on this. And I know that the Quaglia Institute has sent out, I think it's called the Student Voice Survey, to something like 55,000 students. What's the research? Go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish that.
Well, I was just going to say, what's the research tell us?
Yeah, great question. And we actually are just in the process of finishing up redoing a new analysis with all of our data. And we just have hit 1 million kids in our database. Believe it or not. I know, it's pretty incredible. And we have some new impact data out that is just amazing. So we have these 3 guiding principles that we work on: self-worth, engagement, and purpose. And then within our data set, we are able to take statements from, and it's just perception data. We are not even measuring whether or not students actually have a voice by a set of criteria or activities. We're just asking if they think they have a voice. And when students believe they have a voice, they're 32% more likely to experience self-worth in schools. You think about all the work we're doing around belonging and cultivating school culture, and voice is a big piece of that. And it makes sense. If I believe that I matter and that my opinion matters and my voice matters, I am going to believe I am an important part of this school community. When students have a voice, they're 38% more likely to be engaged in school. All the work that we're doing to increase engagement and get students to really participate at higher levels. So when you have a voice, when you have some choice and opinion in what's being learned, 38% more likely to be engaged. And then when students have a voice, they are 43% more likely to have purpose in what they're learning. And that, to me, is the most important one, because that is them increasing their understanding of why they're learning what they're learning and how it can connect to their life both now and in the future. So one more data point, and then I promise, because I don't want to put anybody to sleep with too much.
That's okay. I like it.
But we have one more that's around teacher support that's pretty phenomenal. When students believe they have a voice, they are 78% more likely to report having meaningful support from their teachers. And again, this makes sense in our gut when we think about it. Yes, if I know that I matter and you're listening to me and my voice matters, I'm more likely to ask you for clarification when I don't understand. I'm more likely to come in and ask for help. I'm more likely to be receptive to feedback. But that's a pretty powerful impact data point of 78% more likely to have meaningful teacher support. So, all right, I'll stop with the data.
That's okay. I like the data. I like it a lot, actually. I would say, here's my theory. I would say, and this is a little tangential, but the great untapped resource when it comes to improving as a teacher, continuous improvement, learning, is student voice. Mm-hmm. We have these kids in our classes and they're watching us every day, and we might have 60 or more eyeballs looking at us. And yet we don't often ask them for feedback on what would work, what doesn't work. It's kind of like, imagine setting up a store and then we're asking the customers for feedback on the store. Yeah. And kids, granted, they're in different developmental places and their views might not be fully formed in some ways, depending on where they are developmentally. But to involve kids in designing what they want in terms of good learning experiences, talking about what's working, what's not working, getting them to give you feedback, to me, it is, without question, the one resource we're not fully exploiting when it comes to continuous improvement.
Yeah, I am so with you on that. I mean, educators are a smart bunch of people. I'm so convinced that if we could solve the problems of education by ourselves, we would have figured it out by now. Right. I think you're right. Students are this untapped, and I think we are tapping into it to a certain degree. We're getting better, but I think that is where we are really in. I'm very hopeful about this, that in this next era of education, that we will engage students in such a more meaningful way than we ever have as true partners in the improvement process is exactly what you're describing. So I'm with you.
So what are one or two things a teacher can do to give students a chance to have voice in class?
Yeah. So that's interesting. And we hear that statement a lot about the give. And I would say the first thing is to remember that we are not actually going to give students a voice. They already have one. They are born with one. They come out with a voice. Every student walks into our classroom. They already have one. They have just been conditioned over time to keep it to themselves vast majority of the time and to figure out what hoops they have to jump through to play the game of education. So I think the first thing is a little bit of a mindset in remembering that they have a voice. We're not going to give it to them. We just need to create some conditions where they feel more supported and free to use it, to develop it, and to allow that to become a huge driver of their own education. I think the second thing would be to start thinking about students, not just in terms of the recipient of what we are giving them in school, but as a critical partner. Now, that doesn't mean that they are going to, of course, teachers have credentials and all sorts of knowledge that students don't, but students also have all sorts of knowledge that we don't. So it's not about them becoming equal. Sometimes teachers bristle a little bit about this. Russ uses the example, this is not a zero-sum game. It's not like I have to give up my voice as a teacher in order for students to have more voice. It doesn't work that way. When I allow students to utilize their voice in a more meaningful way in the learning environment, my voice gets stronger as a teacher as well. Our voices in partnership become stronger and become a key lever to really improving the learning that's happening in a classroom. So those are a couple of quick things. We've got loads of like really substantial strategies and suggestions, a ton of stuff for free on the quagliainstitute.org website. There's a library there, and we have instructional strategies and coaching cycles and all sorts of things. But if I were to just talk about two kind of mindset shifts to that question, those would be them.
Yeah, I mean, asking kids for feedback. I love Sheila Heen's book, Thanks for the Feedback, where she says, not all feedback is accurate, but all feedback is good. I mean, you need to learn from feedback. Even incorrect feedback is giving you something you can use. Yeah. And so all feedback has potential. It may not be right, or you may not do the thing right, but it's still useful to get the feedback.
Yeah, agreed. Even silence is interesting feedback. One of the things that Russ and I both speak about frequently is sometimes you don't need a survey to know what's going on. Like, just walk in and survey with your eyes and your ears. I can see when kids are not engaged. We all can. And so sometimes even in the silence, that becomes really powerful feedback to consider of what students are telling us, even without words.
Now, what about coaches? And coaches, what is important for coaches to consider? Now, we could talk about it in two different ways. We could talk about the coaches ensuring that we've created a place where teachers can share their voice. See, I didn't say we're going to give them a voice. Or we could talk about how they could help teachers create that kind of setting. So what advice would you have for coaches about voice?
Yeah, I think both. I would answer both of those kind of in a similar vein. As I said at the beginning, that definition that we use of voice, we use it with teacher voice just as well as we do with student voice. And you're right, Russ and I wrote Teacher Voice together, and that's a real passion project for me. And spent a time in teacher preparation at the university, and just the energy and excitement of those young teachers, and then the struggle transitioning into the reality of education. And whether you're a new teacher or a seasoned teacher, just a lot of, I think, struggle with morale these days, and going back to those same principles that are good for students and necessary for students to embrace around knowing that they matter, that they are important, that they have agency and decision-making opportunities are equally important for teachers as they are for students. So for coaches, I think, first of all, I watch so many master coaches that do a lot of this work very naturally and intuitively. And then there are areas for all of us that I think we can be a little bit more intentional about some of those things. So the demonstrating value, the focusing on the things that are going right, not just honing in on the few things that are going wrong, the giving teachers an opportunity when I'm coming in to coach. It's not just about the indicators I've identified, but what things are you looking to grow? What do you want me to be looking for? And we have, again, another tool that's on our website that is it's a peer observation tool that we have a lot of teachers utilize. And there's a slice of that tool that's just for voice indicators, some for self-worth, engagement, and purpose. But really getting after the specifics of what does it look like in practice? Because we can talk about it in theory. Oh yeah, this sounds nice. Share your ideas. offer some solutions, take some action, but what does it really look like when it is deeply embedded in practice? So I would love it if some instructional coaches, were interested in really digging into some of those tools and indicators of observation and evidence.
Yeah, I would say based on our research and our work that what can interfere with hearing the voices of teachers is, first off, our impulse for certainty. I read a lot about certainty recently, and what I've learned is that certainty is a feeling. It occurs to me, I've talked about this so much in this podcast that people are like, oh, here he's off on a certainty tangent again. But the certainty is a feeling like love or fear, and it's not an objective reality. We want to feel certain. And so because we want to feel certain, we want to tell this person what they should do to solve their problem. We want to get rid of the ambiguity so we can have that feeling of certainty, even though that tendency probably inhibits having good answers, because if you want to look at multiple things and not just one thing. And the second thing is just that consciously or unconsciously, it's powerful to be the one solving the problem. We want to solve the problem so we can feel certain, but then it also feels good to have competence. Yeah. Oh, let me tell you 4 or 5 things you can do. But without listening to the teacher, without hearing their voice, if you solve the problem for them, you own the solution. So rather than saying, oh, let me tell you what I think you should do, maybe start with the question, you've probably thought a lot about this. What do you think you might do? Give them a chance to speak first. And often they'll tell you exactly what you're going to say, or maybe something even better than what you were going to say, because you start by asking rather than telling would be the way we would put it in the simplest possible way. So we're with you on voice. In fact, I think I'm going to claim this. Russ can prove me wrong, but that he got the idea for teacher voice at a presentation I gave at Corwin. I sat down with him after the presentation. He says, I never thought about teacher voice. We have to talk about teacher voice. So I think I'm taking credit for that, whether it's true.
I think you should. I'm all on board for that, Jim. No, I think you're right. And thanks for sharing that. I love both of those takes on the certainty piece. And I think the same thing probably would hold true with students. As teachers, we very well intended. We love our students. We literally love them and we want them to succeed. And so with the most well-intended heart, we jump into fix-it mode all the time. Oh, let me do this for you. And that is not the best thing we can do for them over the process of helping them to learn how to come up with their own solutions and employ their own strategies.
Yeah, I mean, if you solve the problem for them, all you're really telling them is they're not capable of solving it. And if you don't solve the problem, it's wasted time. And pull the same message. I don't think you're capable. I have to fix this for you. And I own the solution. You don't own the solution. So next time you have a problem, come back and I'll fix that one for you too. That penance isn't great.
Yeah, okay, I read something recently that said, said, don't rob another the opportunity of the dignity of proving they can solve their own challenge. And
I love that.
Yeah, I love that phrase, that it's like, I don't want to rob you of the dignity of that or how good it feels. We call it sense of accomplishment. That sense of accomplishment when you have taken control and solved your own challenge.
Okay, so now TLC, you're not talking about voice, despite all this talk about voice. But what you're talking about is aspirations, which extends from voice. So tell me a bit about how that work has evolved and what do we mean by aspirations?
Perfect. So yes, we're an institute for voice and aspirations. And I think the voice piece just tends to be a little bit more out there right now, a buzzword. But the aspirations piece we define as the ability to dream and set goals for the future, but also be inspired in the present to take action that will help you to reach those dreams. So we then create this quadrant. And so for those of you who are listening on just an audio podcast, I'm going to do my best to describe this quadrant to you in a way that I hope you can construct a good mental picture. But if you are a visual learner, we will also make available a graphic, and we'll link in the podcast notes to a brief that will have a visual for you so that you can actually see this little profile. But create, if you would, in your mind, 2 axes. Math teachers will have no problem with this. Others might be like, what does that mean? And it's just 2 lines that are intersecting. On one axis, we have dreaming, and on the other, doing. And so when we encounter students who are low dreaming and low doing, those students are stuck in this space of hibernation. So they are just showing up. They are really struggling to engage. I call it screensaver mode. You know how your phone can be on, but there's not anything happening. Students are just really struggling. We then have students who have high dreams, loads and loads of dreams, but they really struggle to do anything. And those students are stuck in a space of imagination. Now, we love these students because they say everything we want to hear. These are the students who say, oh yeah, just wait till you see my project. It's going to be the most amazing project you've ever seen. And then they don't turn anything in at all. Or you bet I'm going to college. I graduate in 3 weeks and I haven't filled out an application, but I'm going. So, big, big dreams, but there's not a lot of action to demonstrate what it will take to get there. Then perspiration is the opposite, when there's lots of doing, but no dreaming. So these are our students who are spinning out. They're working super hard. And they have no idea why. There's no why or passion associated to the hard work. They're the students who are often coming to us freaked out because they only got a 98 and they need extra credit so they can get 100. But if you ask them, what was interesting to you? Or how does this learning connect to your life? There's no connection to happening for them. And then, of course, the healthy balance of dreaming and doing leads you to aspirations, which is what we are after. Now, none of them are bad, and even aspirations is not perfect. Sometimes we see students who are in that upper place of aspirations, and they're just stressed out all the time, thinking they have to be perfect, and they struggle then when a challenge comes their way. So we want a healthy balance of all of these things. Sometimes we need space for some healthy hibernation, vacation, happy hour, whatever it is for you. Sometimes we need to just dream, and sometimes we have to just work hard. It's about not being stuck. And so that's where our work really resonates, is for teachers, when we identify students who are stuck in a quadrant, how we can create common language and effective strategies to get unstuck and to have a bit better balance. So that's what the TLC session is going to focus on. It'll be highly engaging. We're going to do some activities where participants will reflect on who they were as a student within the context of those quadrants. It'll be a lot of fun. And then a bunch of strategies and a coaching cycle resource and all sorts of stuff to kind of support taking that idea of that profile back to your school and whatever your role is.
Okay, so I'm going to make this personal. How has this understanding, or maybe it hasn't, but has it changed the way you look at your life, how you use your life?
Oh man, yeah. Sometimes annoyingly so, to be honest. I have 3 adult children now, and of course it's always hard to not be and it's funny, even once Russ had a participant after we spoke about this profile come up to him and say, Dr. Quaglia, I just really want to talk to you. I think my husband is stuck in a state of hibernation. What should I do? And of course, Russ, and I'm not too far away from him, and I hear him say, you should just leave him. And I'm like, no, that's not the advice we're giving. But yeah, you're right. And I'm guessing it might be true with your work as well, that when you're so deeply engaged in researching something and writing and teaching about it, it becomes impossible to not start putting your whole life through the same lens. So personally, I'm always looking for, am I having a healthy balance in my own life? Because I can certainly get sucked into the perspiration quadrant pretty easily, where I'm spinning out and doing, and I have to stop. Yeah. And say, why am I passionate about this? And do I need to have a little bit of healthy hibernation for a moment? And that level of awareness every time I teach it or talk about it. Am I really living this? Because if I'm not, that's a big problem.
Well, I think building in structured ways of thinking about your goals and what really matters and reflecting on what you're doing, because it's pretty easy to get drawn into the trouble with perspiration is, things have to get done. I've got this urgent thing, and there's another urgent thing after that. And then after that urgent thing and that other urgent thing, there's one more urgent thing. We're so busy doing, we never pause to say, are we doing the right things? And so what I hear here is it is important to pause and say, well, what is most important? What are my priorities? And am I focused on aspiration, not just perspiration?
Yes.
Is there an argument for times when each of these things is actually a good thing?
Yes, absolutely. And even in the session that we're going to do, there will be a slide that will say, here's the potential pros and here's the potential cons, because there are good things within all of them. For example, in hibernation, those people tend to be more natural at self-reflection, giving time and space for relaxation and to let information soak in, than like the people who are in perspiration and aspiration. They're just like, get her done, get on to the next thing. So there are things that we can really learn from people who tend to gravitate towards that hibernation thing. Again, it's about not being stuck so that we're in paralysis there. But you're so right. There are good things within each of those.
I have a friend who talks about doing serious nothing.
I'm writing that down. I love that.
She says you have to be intentional about doing nothing for a while, because that's when cool things happen. You just cut everything out and you chill. But I'm too busy perspiring to hibernate. Okay, so, and I'm sure we can't answer this in a 2-minute conversation, but if I have a student who's hibernating or a child who's hibernating, how do I help them move from hibernation to aspiration? That's probably the number one question you're asked. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a really common one. And you're right, it's a really complex answer. But for the sake of our conversation, I will start here. We very clearly know what will not motivate a student out of hibernation. And that thing is our default thing that we do over and over as educators. And here's what it is. When we have a student in hibernation, they typically are not turning in any work and they are failing our class. So we go to them, and again, I do it very well intended. I say, oh, Jim, I see you're missing 17 assignments and you're failing my class, and I'm so worried about you. What can I do to help you get these assignments in? But that student has already demonstrated that the assignment, the points, the grade is not motivating to them. So continuing to try to ride that horse of the grades and the assignments is not going to get a student out of hibernation. It's first about letting them know that they are valued and finding out what things do they do care about. Because right now they don't care about the assignments and the grades and success in school by all of the standard measures. So I need to get to know that student and first let them know I care about them in whatever state they're in. And I need to figure out how to crack the nut of what are they motivated by? What do they care about in life? What are their hopes and dreams for the future? And a truly struggling hibernating student is going to have a really hard time answering that question the first time you ask it. So we have to be very persistent and not give up. This is not going to be one conversation with a hibernating student where I just say, okay, so tell me, what do you care about? And what is motivating you? What do you want to do with your life? And expect them to all of a sudden flip a switch and be able to answer those things. It's going to take building a relationship and being relentless about asking those questions until you find that first spark. Here's something you care about. You have a younger sibling and you do care about the example that you're setting for them. You do have an interest in, engineering or building things or whatever it might be. You just don't want anybody to know that because you've built this facade around you that you don't care about school or learning or anything. So it'll be a different little thing that becomes the initial hook with each kid, but it's not giving up, pursuing a relationship and finding something out about them that can be leveraged into a motivator or engaging in the academic experience.
Yeah, I remember I was watching a special ed teacher in high school with a student, and the student said, well, I'm just a lazy person. I just don't really like to work hard. I don't like to do this stuff. And the teacher looked at him and she said, but you're a guitarist, right? She said, how much time do you spend practicing the guitar?
Yeah.
So I probably spend 2 or 3 hours a day just playing guitar, trying to get better. And she said, so you do like to work. You just don't like to work on the things we're talking about. You do have discipline because you have it there. So it's not you, it's something else. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool to watch that all kind of evolve and play out. Yeah. Anything else you could tell us about the presentation? What should people come expecting to see happen?
Come expecting to engage. It would be a super boring session and actually awkward for everybody if you just sat at the table, because you will be up, you will be moving. You'll be engaging in dialogue with your fellow participants. And then probably most importantly, you're going to leave with a variety of resources. One of our commitments to any type of presentation or work that we do is to really try and bridge that gap between a really nice session and conversation and then what that means for you in whatever your role might be back at your school. Because, man, we sure go to a lot of great sessions and get excited about things, and then we go back to business as usual, and that gap is so hard to bridge often. So one of our goals is to send participants away with loads of takeaways that try to bridge that gap and give you tools to add to your toolkit and hopefully put into play as you go back and try to make things happen in your school.
Now, I don't know if you have time for this, but are you going to talk about teachers and where they fit into these boxes too?
Yeah, what's funny is that it's kind of impossible not to. I know the focus for this particular session is is student voice. So that's where our primary focus will be. But it just becomes impossible to not bleed over into that a little bit, especially because almost every teacher's like, I'm in perspiration. I'm just going to let you. And we actually do one activity in the session where we intentionally allow some self-reflection as to where you were at when you were a student and where you might be at now. But yeah, I run a couple of teacher leader academies in different places across the country, and we do deep work around ourselves as professionals within this aspiration profile with teachers and leaders as well. And I think it's a pretty valuable experience.
So basically, it's a triple whammy. We're going to be able to get all kinds of tools to help us work with students more effective. We're going to reflect on the teachers, the people we work with, to think about how we can understand what might be most motivating to them. But then also we're going to reflect on ourselves and talk about, well, where am I on this quadrant and what can I do to grow? So I get to learn about teachers, students, and myself all in that one presentation. And I've seen you present, so I know it's going to be awesome.
Well, thank you very much. We try to go for the under promise, over deliver. So I hope we're not overhyping here. But
yeah, that's true.
I'm going to have a great time, and I hope everybody else does too.
Research does say you should have low expectations. So they did a study and they went to Finland to find out why it's the happiest place in the world. You probably know this.
Yes.
But they said it's because we don't expect much. So when something good happens, it's good. So I think low expectations are a good idea. But it's going to be difficult with your presentation because I have expectations.
That's very kind.
Well, Lisa, thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for the conversation. I'm so grateful. I'm looking forward to TLC.
I just want to say thanks for being such a great thinking partner over time. I know Russ and I appreciate you immensely, and looking forward to TLC.
Thanks.
All right, thanks. We'll talk to you soon.
That was great. Perfect. Right. Wonderful. And I learned something, so I love it.
So did I. I've written down serious nothing. I want to dig into that. So whose work have you been studying around certainty? Because I found that really interesting.
Oh, I can't. There's two books. One's just called Certainty. It came out in 2003 or 2023. And I can send you the names of the books. I don't see them right here. I just wrote what I'll do, Lisa, is I just wrote a column on it for Ed Leadership. So I'll send you the column.
I would appreciate that. I honestly was like, I had to force myself to not derail the whole conversation because I just wanted to ask you a bunch of questions about that. So I would appreciate that a lot.
Well, it has a lot to do with and I'm really interested in why it's so hard to talk about politics these days. It's because part of it is certainty. There's other parts too, but
yeah,
it's not a simple thing. But the certainty is a big part of it, and people confuse. They say, "Well, I feel certain," but I feel certain doesn't mean it's accurate, And so recognizing the difference between feeling certain and then if you opt for certainty, what you do is you limit your options. Because you jump to, well, here's the solution, as opposed to let's look at 5 or 6 different options and try to work something out. So,
right.
So it's interesting.
It is. Yeah. All right. Always a pleasure to speak with you and see you, and look forward to see you in New Orleans.
It's always too short and too brief, but it's great when it happens. Take care.
Great. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.